Hello and welcome to Zoom session number 5. Hopefully everyone is doing well. I know a couple of you are having some health issues, so my sincere blessings and apologies for that. I wanted today to go over kind of wrapping it all up with what is on our text and making sure if there are any questions that you go ahead and send me an email or ask me directly. So once again, it's session 5. Learning outcomes for post-instructional assessment includes understanding and applying knowledge of assessment issues as they affect the learning of English language learners from diverse backgrounds and at varying English proficiency levels. Some examples include cultural and linguistic biases, testing in 2 languages, socio-political and psychological factors, special education testing, and assessing giftedness. The importance of standards, the difference between formative and summative assessments, and the difference between language proficiency and other types of assessments. Number 2, appropriately use and interpret a variety of language proficiency assessment instruments to meet district, state, and federal guidelines and to inform their instruction. Teachers will understand their use for identification, placement, and demonstration of language growth of ELLs from diverse backgrounds and at varying English proficiency levels. Number 3, identify, develop, and use a variety of standards and performance-based formative and summative assessments and techniques to inform instruction and assess student learning. Teachers will understand their use for identification, placement, and demonstration, and really be able to work with the students. Teachers will also be able to understand the language growth and understand how to accommodate those students. So once again, we have formative assessment and summative assessment. Formative assessment is going to be ongoing. Things like maybe a passage in an essay would be an informal formative assessment. The formal assessment would be the entire passage. Then we have summative assessment. Summative assessment, informal, summative assessments are going to be more authentic, maybe a portfolio based. And then we have a summative assessment that's formal, going to be high-stakes learning. Week 5, we talk about post-instructional assessment. TESOL, ESL Domain 1, language acquisition and development, understanding and applying current theoretical theories and research in language and literacy development, helping English speakers of other language students develop academic language proficiency, helping ESOL students develop effective language learning strategies. TESOL, ESL Domain 3, planning, implementing, and managing instruction. Once again, we need to make sure that we understand the domains of teaching English speakers of other languages. Planning for standards-based ESL and content instruction. Plan students' learning experience based on assessment of language proficiency and prior knowledge. TESOL, ESL Domain 4 is assessment. Language proficiency assessment. Understand, construct, and use assessment measures for a variety of purposes for ESOL students, ESOL learners, language skills, and communicative competences using multiple sources of information. We have teacher-driven post-instructional assessment, linguistic post-instructional assessment, academic post-instructional assessment, cognitive post-instructional assessment, sociocultural post-instructional assessment. Post-instructional assessment, the teacher's role is to elicit and document the mental representations that the student has created during the lesson. And once again, the teacher is really involved with that. Review how the post-instructional strategies and activities presented in this chapter represent only a fraction of the possible authentic assessments for student learning. Limitations exist only when teachers begin to box themselves in with concerns about time and how they're going to get it done or the professional development. Instead of allowing them to really be creative and go with the needs and the assessments of the particular population of students. In such instances, we educators must remember the authentic post-instructional assessment provides the most meaningful information for planning instruction and meeting the needs of CLD students. I'd like to go ahead and take this time to go over the PowerPoint. Reevaluation consideration. Accommodations for special education students. Individual education plans. We need to remember that we have to continue to reassess these IEPs each year and throughout the year to make sure that they're aligning in with the benchmarks and objectives. Disproportionality. What is the right way to work with our students that are CLD, ESL students, but also with the general population? Underrepresentation. How can we, as instructors, really work with all levels of the classroom? Okay? I know they're underrepresented, the ELL, especially in, the summative formal assessments. How can we really speak with them? Exceptionality. How can we make sure that those students that have giftedness are also included in this idea of assessment or authentic assessment? And then general education pre-assessment. What is general education, and how can we make it, open the gates for all students involved? Teacher-driven post-instructional assessment. Okay, this is a linguistic post-instructional assessment, and there's academic post-instructional assessment. Cognitive post-instructional assessment and sociocultural post-instructional assessment. But what about the gray? Well, post-instructional assessment techniques and strategies revolves around the importance of reflective journals or metacognition, or really being able to identify and discuss what is in your thought process of learning. And mapping and scaffolding. We can look to ideas as far as Vygotsky, and we can really think about the theoretical framework of understanding how our mind brings our schema theory and to reach us to the proximal level of identification of new material. Some of the testing strategies for CLD students we can include with maybe using visuals. We need to remember multiple levels of intelligences. We also need to be aware of emotional intelligences. That's a big one. We need to think about Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence, just as important as being cognitively developable. KWL, those charts, okay? KWL is a chart that says what I know, what I want to know, and what I want to learn or I have learned. Mapping, is just another way for us to make sure that we have graphic organizers to really understand how we can do it. So I would suggest using a map to map out our ideas, and it does help. Those are some of the main things. I also like to use Venn diagrams as well. I'd like to go over now some of our references. The first reference I'd like to identify with, one that's directly from our course, this is from Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. This is ESEA information update. This is from revised 2009. The initial identification and placement of English language learners. It provides an overview for identification, placement in language instruction education, current notification, annual assessments for ELLs. So we have the step 1 is identification through the home language survey. Step 2 is the preliminary evaluation. And this is the academic history. This is evaluating how they're doing in the classroom. Step 3 is the screener evaluation for instructional placement. Students with limited education English language skills who have recently just arrived in the United States, they're going to be enrolled. Then they take the WIDA Access Placement Test. This is Wisconsin's initial English language screener. WAPT score should be used to determine the initial tier placement for English language learners. As you go through, you can see that if the student scores a 6 on the screener, then the student is considered English proficient, and no further ELP or English limited proficiency testing is warranted. If not, then we continue to see where they're at. Then they're placed into language instructional educational programs, and it's required to notify the parent. The annual assessment will then be done annually, and we're looking for overall competency proficiency level 5 or higher should be evaluated to see if they meet the reclassification. And here's some other ways you can look at that as well. Document 2. This is aligning learning activities and assessment strategies in the ESL classroom, accurately gouging the extent to which student progress into the goals that have been set for the most difficult tasks. It talks about the standards, about the plan, the objectives, learning activities, and evaluation. Evaluation is, one way of using authentic evaluation or authentic summative assessments would be an oral performance and also a written performance. Next one is placing English language learners into programs. By now, you've determined the student speaks other language at home. Kind of goes through with what should you consider? How much previous education does the student have in his or her native language? What's his or her language proficiency in their native language? How much support you can kind of use as a guide. Next is from PDSF. This is placement assessment of English language learners. Once again, how is the case example? We can look at the tiers and the bilingual issues and the conclusion. Chapter 8, Herrera really looks at teacher-driven and post-instructional assessment and cognitive post-instructional assessment. I want us to also look at discussion 5, which is due. This is where we discuss various questions a teacher must consider when planning for language assessment. There's also the performance-based lessons. You're going to design and develop a performance-based assessment plan of ELLs in a specific content area. This includes reading, language, arts, math, science, and social studies. Students will design and develop a performance-based assessment plan of ELLs in a specific content area. This includes reading, language, arts, math, science, and social studies. It needs to include the following elements. 1, the description of the selected grade level and subject. 2, the rationale for the selected performance-based assessment method strategy. 3, specific test item tasks. 4, scoring procedures and rubrics. It can be holistic or analytical. 4, self and or peer assessment rubric. 6, the planning of how the results will be used to inform instruction. Okay. If you have any questions on that, please we're going to go over to handouts that I will also put up on our classroom. The first is a research article that talks about the culturally and linguistically responsive vocabulary approach for young Latino dual language learners. As you can go through there, you'll see the instructions, the difference between language 1 and language 2. Handout number 2 talks about the effect of instruction on conventional expressions in language 2 pragmatic. This is on the effects of instruction in English pragmatic by Rose. So this one was from Elsevier. Cyverse Science from Science Direct. Handout 4 talks about interlanguage pragmatics in the zone of proximal development. So we're going to use Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. Handout 5 talks about formative assessment systems, evaluating the fit between school district needs and assessment systems characteristics. Remember, once again, formative is going to be ongoing. So recent legislative and local school accountability efforts have placed a premium on the collection, analysis, and use of student assessment data for educational improvement. As a result, schools have sought assessments that provide additional information about student performance. In response, an industry formed formative educational assessment systems. In the study, we describe how districts search for and acquire formative assessment systems to meet their needs. And they focus on school districts that adopted 3 different formative assessment systems. Our findings suggest the fit between a system's characteristics and a school district's intended use is the most important consideration in instituting a successful formative assessment system that will have a positive impact on teacher education and student learning. There's some really good stuff there. Okay. If you don't have any other questions, I'm going to end the meeting, and please feel free to contact me. Thank you.